everybody. Thanks for watching. So real quick, I'm gonna get right into this video, right? So we want to get into the establishment of America, right? Establishing this country and what led up to it. And to understand that, we can look at what's been basically taking place today, right? So we understand the whole history of Native Americans. We understand about the Moors now, but all we really got to do is look at recent history and to go back and look at the conquest by the Europeans and see it's not that different from the establishment of America, right? So it's important to understand, one, you had Europeans come out of nowhere seemingly and began to colonize anywhere where there's melanated people. Now, America was no different from Africa, but something happened, of course. So when you understand, right, what's going on in Africa right now, Africa is a huge landmass that's full of different countries with a lot of natural resources, right? And once these people got their hands on Africa, they've been mining Africa for resources ever since then, right? So basically the same thing happened before with America. So if you understand and you look at it, and we understand now the Moors were already in America. They already had things set up. So what happened? Now, with Africa, we can see the Europeans come in there with some type of deal. And it's a deal either for, trade, or back then it was religion, bringing religion into the territories. And we see that with the conquest of Columbus and what the Spaniards went out and did to a lot of these South American civilizations. They went out there to spread the religion, and they slowly traded until they infiltrated, and eventually they took over. And we've seen this happen in Africa as well. But you got to look at America, right? North America, where the Moors was ruling, and what was already here. Now, a lot of people ask me about Tartaria, and I have a whole video coming out on that soon, a whole DVD, because there's a lot to get into with that whole situation. But we have to look at it this way and say something was here before the America we know today. And then now that's been covered up. But we got to look at how this came about. So you picture it and you have this understanding of America and the resources that are here. And what happened? Just like we see today with the puppets in Africa and all these other countries, what do? The powers that be, they send somebody out there and they run the country they colonized. So we see with like Saddam and, Gaddafi and these other dictators or rulers that was in these countries, they were sent there. They were allowed to rule and dictate, and they had an agenda. They had orders they had to go off. And eventually what happened? They defy these orders. The government stages a coup. A coup happens and they dethrone the ruling power that's in place. And another puppet is put in place to control things. So now you have to look at America in the same context where the Masons are sent over here. The so-called founding fathers, they're sent to America. They're running America. So what led up to the American Revolution, right? What happened? Talked about this before. We had the colonists and the people that's ruling realizing that the controlling power, which would be King George III in England, is not treating us fairly. It's not running things correctly. We don't like how things is run. We are basically living here. We have to run these people. So we understand how the society is supposed to be run. So you guys are levying these crazy taxes on us, not allowing us to have enough gold to pay our bills. And then we come up with colonial script, our own money, right? What's been the whole system, the whole problem with America? Every time a nation comes up and they want to put out their own gold or their own currency, there's a takeover. So this takeover happens and the old regime is ousted, somebody else is put in place, right? So now you have to look at it and say, we had this issue in America where the colonists and the founding fathers realized that Britain was basically coming down too hard. They wasn't going to allow them to be, free and sovereign on their own to run the country the way they seem fit. So we had the American Revolution, right? And everything that basically happened. So you have to equate that to what we've been seeing around the world with all these coups and everything that's been taking place and why they have been so adamant to not allow it to ever happen again, because they understand, one, they lost before. And they understand once a coup happens, once the people who they put in power began to understand and try to change things, it could lead to them losing a country for who knows how long, right? It's a long time before they got America back. So coups happen. But look at it in America. You had the Masons, you had the so-called founding fathers, basically stabbing, King George III, the crown, England in the back. And, the war happened and they lost, right? Powers that be lost. And then you had the formation of the United States, right? This country coming together, Constitution, Declaration of Independence, all that stuff happened. And it was like free and independent from King George III and revolution, and things are going to be different. Things are going to change. We've been seeing this all over the world for decades, for a long time. All these countries wanting the same thing, and that's this independence. Everywhere you look, you're seeing a country have independence. Independence from who? Independence from what? How do you have independence in a country that is yours, right? So we see, like in Ethiopia, we see in Eritrea, these independence, these constitutions in these African countries, right? How is that? How do these countries have constitutions and independence? Independence from where? And that gets you into the understanding of who's really running things and why they would want independence away from these people. So what would follow this? Once they got control of these countries or what have you, we know what happened in South America. They've been in there. And we had them send in the same thing I showed you with North Africa. Once they controlled and conquered North Africa, what did they do? They sent their people. So we had the Romans go over to Spain, right? Mix in with those people all throughout Northern Africa, right? Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, mix in and blend in with these people. Same thing back then with South America, where they basically was paying people to go in and mix out as much as they could dark-skinned people. So you had the whole thing, the Blanqueamiento, I believe it was called, to where they basically was giving Europeans benefits to go ahead and mix in with light-skinned black people, because they felt like if it's a light-skinned black person, 9 times out of 10, they already have in their bloodline a white person. So mix in with the lightest skin, black woman you can find and have kids. And then that child would marry someone white, and then boom, they get melanin back in the bloodline. And this is what was going on. So as I said, European immigration. Some countries like Brazil actively encourage and even subsidize European immigration as a means to whiten the population. The belief was that the influx of European immigrants and subsequent intermarriage would dilute the African and indigenous ancestry in the population. However, this wasn't simply about paying Europeans to have children. It involved various policies like attracting European immigrants and fostering a cultural environment that favored European norms. Beyond simple whitening, it's important to note that Blanqueamiento wasn't solely, which means whitening, wasn't solely about breeding out black people. It also involved efforts to marginalize and assimilate indigenous populations and promote a vision of national identity that favored European heritage. The historical context of slavery and racial hierarchies deeply influenced these policies, resulting in ongoing racial inequalities and discrimination. So we had the conquest, right? Conquest, raping these countries of resources, growing in power and wealth in the process. Then they would send their people in there to basically breed in and mix out the dark-skinned people. So it would look like later on today that these people was already there. I mean, you look at Argentina. Argentina is super white. We know the indigenous people was as black as me, right? Same thing with Puerto Rico, right? They come in, they mix in. And they did this throughout the world. They did this in Northern Africa. And now we have the whole term, the Sub-Saharan Africa. So they can basically steal North Africa when we know the history of what these people did and that they came in and conquered, right? So we got to look at America and see this is the same thing that happened. The only difference was what? We fought back. They didn't expect the revolution to happen. They didn't expect the people to rise up. America is the wild card. And it's what is America. So if you think about revenge, and that's how I look at this whole thing, it's the ultimate fucking revenge. Because these people that's in this country today, the people that's, blue Americans, right? They have within them the bloodlines, the founding fathers, and the people that fought in these revolutions and fought against the powers that be today, right? That's in their blood. So to them, this is the ultimate revenge to get these people back. And since they know this bloodline exists within these people, they want to stamp it out. They want to stamp out any hope of revolution or anything that would instill what basically beat them before, which was what? Fucking unity. So we have been driven. Remember, I showed you guys the photos going back to the Great Depression, right? Remember, it's supposed to be all this racism, right? Blacks only, whites only. But I showed you guys the photos of black people standing in line in the 20s with white people. The same line, the same soup kitchen line with white folks, right? How was that possible, right? So we seen that there was a change that we have at one point, black and white mingling, mixing together. It wasn't as big as an issue as it is today. And then once the takeover completely happened, which I would say they completely got control over everything around 1935, I would say. But before that, everything was fine. But then we can clearly see that it was an agenda put in place to basically divide and conquer, right? Divide and conquer. So now we have Jim Crow South after this. We have all the racial disparities, all the discrimination and everything that happened to keep the separation because they couldn't allow blacks and whites to unite. So all throughout history, ever since then, it's been exactly that. It's been the separation. And then now that we're on this cusp of this revolution, we're finding the same thing in this day and time, which is this whole racial divide that's been happening. You know, whole Trayvon Martin case, Oscar Grant with Fruitvale Station, everything that's been happening, right? All the shootings up from cops and killing black people. There's always been this constant separation of black and white because it was black and white that beat them in the American Revolution, the War of 1812, the Civil War, and so on and so forth. So they don't want that to happen. But they also know that they're going to need African Americans or black people, period, to move forward, which is why the race mixing is on the forefront of their agenda. And we're seeing it today. Man, you got to understand, and excuse the music if you hear it. You got to understand, like, as I said, our power has always been our influence. And our influence have been there all throughout history, even with slavery being as long as it was and people holding slaves as captives over the years, over time, they would see how good of a people black people are, right? How helpful we are, how smart we are. With us inventing so many things during slavery and after slavery, people would see it. They would be true to themselves and see how much of a contribution black people could have to society. And they didn't want slavery anymore. And they knew that that would be infectious and it would spread throughout time. So it was determined at some point, you got to free the slaves. You got to free them. You got to let these people go because in keeping them, they more and more look like the bad guy. And then you have other countries pointing that out, right? So you have to look at Africa today, what's happening in Burkina Faso, what's going on over there. Eventually, you have to let the people go. Eventually, things are going to change, especially if we're going to need these people going forward. So we're seeing that with the rise of Ibrahim Traoré and what's happening in Burkina Faso and Mali and Niger. And it's what happened before. It's what happened during slavery. So they let us go. They let us free. Made it look like it's a civil war. We won. President Lincoln set the people free. And we were allowed to go and flourish or what have you. Difference is Africa is our continent. It's ours, you know, and America was ours as well. But they didn't dominate and establish themselves all throughout Africa like they did in America, right? We are the minority here, not in Africa. So things have to look way more perfect than it did with America. Because see, in America, these white people are food. They think they won a revolution and they beat England and that we won. And, you know, Britain lost and we are in control. We are running this country. But clear as day, we are not. It's run by oligarchs. It's run by a shadow government. It's run by a royal family. It's run by Rome. So many people is running things. It's not Americans. Clear as day, it's not Americans. Because there's no way if America is running this country that we would allow our people to starve to death while we feed our enemy countries so much fucking money. But what happened in America was the ruling power, the so-called founding fathers, the people that was running the country, realized how wrong things was and things wasn't getting better. And we had the war, as I said, and then the revolution. Things changed, start printing our own money. And basically the same thing, as I said, with Saddam and these other countries that try to print their own money, same type of situation. So we've been seeing the same plan play out in different countries for centuries. centuries. And it's been the same thing. But a lot of people are not putting a finger on it. Why is it that we have a ruling power, which back then was the crown, right? It was the crown. What did the crown do? They exchanged the crown and the royal family for governments, right? For a governmental structure, so the people wouldn't know who the real enemy is. So now when something goes wrong, they know not to go to the monarchy, because they're not running anything. You got to go to the prime minister, the president, the person that's really running things. And it's a puppet post. But really, it's the ruling family, it's the royal family that's running things. And they wanted to get away from that because of what happened to previous rulers. And they know how the people could be relentless and basically go after their fucking heads, right? So they had this establishment of governments which changed everything, right? They learned from their mistake. So you had here in America, Founding Fathers, American Revolution, right? And you have the wars that follow, and it's the same thing we've been seeing. So after the revolution was won, we know we had the War of 1812, we know we had the Civil War, and it was because they had still people in those territories, namely in the South, that were still controlling things and had their hands in how the power structure was going to be ruling things. So once the Congress was put together, and eventually we know those people would be bought off, but they still had interests in these other countries because that's where they came from.